Well, I appreciate everyone tuning in to another episode of the Bully Resistance Show. Before we get started, everyone knows that bullying is worse today than has ever been. You've seen it on social media all over the place. There's now two ways that you can actually help me continue the fight against bullying in the public schools. First, if you haven't subscribed to the Bully Resistance Show, it doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is just go to my website at www.davebond.org, and you'll see the banner that says subscribe to the Bully Resistance Show, and all you have to do is just click either on the Android or iPhone, and you can subscribe. Now, the second way, and I guess probably the most important, you can be either a one-time sponsor or a monthly sponsor as low as $4 per month. What we're doing is this. Depending on the sponsorship, you can receive either a digital download track of the week, a digital download sheet of the month. You can put an ad on the Bully Resistant podcast, free tickets to my Chocolate Jazz concerts, depending, of course, on the location. But at least this way, you're not just giving money away, but you're getting something in return. All you have to do is just go to my website at www.davebond.org, scroll down and click on the Patreon banner, and then you can actually get more information from that point on. So, with no further ado, sit back and enjoy the next Bully Resistance Show. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Bully Resistance Show. This is David, and today we have a return guest from California that was on the show several months ago. Just real quickly, he started jiu-jitsu at the age of 46, and we all know how tough it is to train in jiu-jitsu, let alone competing in jiu-jitsu. But anyway, he has a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. He competes in the Master 5 division. He is a 3-time IBJJF Pan Ams Champion, 2-time IBJJF No-Gi World Champion, 5-time Sports Jiu-Jitsu International Federation World Champion, 11-time IBJJF American Nationals Champion, and then a 5-time North American Brazilian Jiu Jitsu Federation World Champion. Also, he is the owner and one of the instructors of, I think, Carlson Gracie Jiu Jitsu team in Temecula, California. So at this time, I wanted to introduce BJJ Moses on the Bully Resistance Show. Gene, thanks for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
Hey, was all those correct, in regards to all those, did I miss anything?
NABJJF and SJJJF are actually the same organization.
Okay. And since I last talked with you, did you already have your academy opened already at the time?
Yes, the academy's been open for coming up on 3 years now.
Oh, 3 years. Okay. Real quickly, now everybody knows you as BJJ Moses. So catch us up on why they call you BJJ Moses.
Well, I have a long white beard to begin with. So one of my professors, one of the black belts, we call them professors, gave me the nickname BJJ Moses because I guess I resembled Moses from the movie The Ten Commandments.
Okay. Before we let everyone know what your thoughts are in regards to bullying and in the public schools and the community and what you think the solution is, because I want to hear what you think of what we can do to prevent bullying from happening. I want you to tell me how the competition went at the world's largest, jiu-jitsu tournament. It was the Masters, or the World's Masters.
Yes.
I mean, when was it? Where was it at? And then also, I want you to tell us how you got mentally and physically ready for the whole tournament.
Well, it was the third week of August of this year, 2019, and I ended up taking third place, which I'm not too happy with. Took second place the year before, so you don't want to go in reverse, obviously. But if it's any consolation, which it is somewhat of a consolation, the guy that beat me actually went on to win the division and was awarded his black belt while he was on the podium. So, and he came up to me afterwards and he told me that I was the toughest out of all of his matches, that I gave him the toughest match. So that kind of helped, heal my wounds a little bit. But like I said, it did. Once you've had a taste of gold, nothing else satisfies.
It's lonely at the top, isn't it, Gene?
Yeah.
Well, aren't you ranked like number 4 worldwide in IBJJF?
I'm currently ranked number 4 with the gi, and I'm currently ranked number 3 in no-gi.
Being the owner of Jiu Jitsu Academy, do you suggest or sort of encourage your students to compete?
I definitely encourage them to compete. Competition is not for everybody. And so, and some people will never compete and they don't have any desire to compete, and that's fine. But I do encourage them to compete because I think there's a lot of value there.
Just push you to become better in jiu-jitsu? Does it make you focus? I mean, why does it help you?
Yeah, all of those things. So it gives you a milestone. It gives you a goal, first of all. Gives you something to train for, something to prepare for. It helps you. There's a mental side to jiu-jitsu that a lot of people. So you can be really good in the gym, in the school. Maybe you're tapping at all your teammates. I know guys that are so good when they're training, and then they fall apart in competition because they don't have mentally, they don't have control of their nerves, or they're not in control of their mind. And so what happens is they let their fears overcome them. They get nervous. They can't eat. A whole variety. They forget their game plan. They don't know what to do. They're afraid to take chances. So it's a good experience to help you, prepare for something, to be mentally prepared. But also, I think it's because of the adrenaline, and because of the nerves, and because of the format. It's probably the closest thing we're going to see to a self-defense situation where you have to perform under pressure, which is completely different than performing in a relaxed environment.
I want to talk about the competition, the anxiety that comes with competition. And I know that when you compete in anything, if it's a team related or if it's a one-on-one, people get some nerves. I mean, I still, as a performer, before I get on stage, I've always dealt with stage fright, and I've learned to deal with it and certain things I do before I go on stage. But I think the same reason why people don't pursue their dreams is because they're afraid to fail. And do you think that that's one of the reasons why people that compete one-on-one in sports is because they're afraid to fail, or do you think it's lack of preparation?
It could be both. It depends on the individual. Some people, they know in advance that maybe they just don't have control of their nerves. Like my wife, for example. My wife is a blue belt, and she's made it clear that she will never, ever compete. And I've never tried to force her or push her, just because it would be too overwhelming for her. Mentally too overwhelming. She's just wired differently than I am. And some people are like that, and that's fine. It's not a necessary part of jiu-jitsu, but I think that it is scary in the sense that, you're putting yourself out there. And whenever you're testing yourself in front of your instructor, in front of your teammates, in front of your family. And if it doesn't go well, especially if you own an academy, it's not good for business.
I understand. Let me ask you this. You said that you opened up your academy about 3 years ago, and in Temecula, California, that is not a cheap place to pay rent. I mean, it's very expensive. California is a very expensive state to live in. What was your feelings like before opening up an academy? I mean, were you reluctant in doing that? What kind of thoughts was going through your head? And I think one of the things I always want to go ahead and share is that so many people that I have come across, they don't pursue their dream because they're afraid to fail. In regards of you opening up the academy, what was your thought process, and what made you actually jump into the lake and start your academy?
Well, believe it or not, this is the first. I've owned and operated several businesses since I was in my late 20s.
Oh.
And this is probably half a dozen businesses, and this is the first time that I actually sat down and put together a long-term plan. Every other business that I opened was more spontaneous. I saw an opportunity. I jumped. Sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it failed miserably. But I think the culmination of all that experience made me realize, look, if this is something I'm serious about, I need to have a plan. And so rather than just running out and signing a lease somewhere, I put together a long-term plan with my instructor. And he helped me actually reach my goal of opening a school. So the plan began with me volunteering my time to help him teach his kids, because I knew if I was going to be a good instructor, I needed to have instruction experience. And so I just came to him and said, look, I'd like to help out with the kids program any way I can. So I was helping out 3 days a week with him, just being there, being a coach on the mat, learning how the class was structured, from the coaching perspective, how things were done. And then I teamed up with another friend of mine who's a public school teacher about 30 minutes up the highway, who runs a Muay Thai program for his students after class. And he approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in putting together a kids jiu-jitsu program in Paris, California. And so I did that. We we added 2 more days a week. So this is back in the end of 2015, early 2016. I'm teaching now kids classes 5 days a week. 3 I'm helping and 2 I'm actually running. And within 1 year, I was able to take some of those kids that came to Paris and have them compete and have them win gold medals, a couple of adults too. So at that point, I realized, okay, I know I can take somebody to knowing nothing to actually not only just learning jiu-jitsu, but being very effective when they're put to the test. And so at that point, I decided I wanted to open an academy. And the next question was where. And so I got together with my instructor once again, and we started looking at different locations. And finally, we both agreed on a location. And instead of biting off a big piece of overhead, monthly overhead, I started small. And so my initial space was about 1,500 feet. At 1,500 square feet, it cost me about $1,500 a month. And then after 1 year, the program grew and we needed more square footage. So we were able to knock one of the walls down. And now we have a 3,500 square foot facility. And we've been 3,500 square feet for going on 2 years now. We're paying over $4,000 a month, but God continues to bring people to me, and the business is profitable now.
So how many hours do you put in a week then in actually teaching or just working there, I guess?
Yeah, I haven't counted it up. I think I teach about, let me see real quick, 5 kids classes, about maybe 7 adult classes. So I teach, I'm usually teaching at least 12 classes a week myself. And then on top of that, I'm training. I'm trying to train at my instructor's facility, which is about 8 miles from my home, about 2 times a week also. So I'm putting in, I'd say I'm probably putting in about 25 hours a week in jiu-jitsu.
Well, that's not bad. I mean, it's not like, 60, 80 hours that you're spending,
No, because the classes are, 60 minutes or 90, depending on if it's kids or adults. And, you get a break during the day. So
sure.
If I'm going to teach a class as soon as we get off of this call, I'll teach a 90-minute class from 9 a.m. to 10:30. And then I won't have to be back tonight until 4:30, 5 o'clock. So
I want to go ahead and go back into competing and the anxiety that people go through. And I'm actually going from my experience. I don't know what it is. Of course, like I said, I've always had stage fright in performing, but every time, Gene, in regards to actually competing jiu-jitsu, that just escalates and intensifies 100 times. And I don't know, at my age at 54, especially when I compete, it's mostly in Ohio, like Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati. And I don't know if it's because I'm competing against, guys that are, 30 years old, 33. I mean, the oldest guy that I actually competed against was like 42 years old, and he was wrestling coach and everything else. So I'm dealing with kids or people half my age. That being said, I know that in regards to competing in the World's Masters, it's pretty close with your weight and division and age and everything else. But I know that you also compete the other opens, the smaller tournaments. How do you deal with anxiety in yourself and preparing to compete like that day? I mean, do you listen to music? Is it because, you do well because you compete all the time? I mean, how do you deal with your anxiety?
Yeah, it's one of those things, like the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with the experience. I don't usually get nervous anymore, but I do know that on the day that I do know 2 things. The day that I show up at the tournament, when I walk in there and I'm waiting, my brain always asks myself, like, why are you doing this to yourself? So because at that point, your adrenaline kind of kicks in. There's a waiting process. The waiting is the worst. You're waiting for your bracket to start. Sometimes it doesn't start on time. Sometimes your opponent's not there. He's running late. And so there's all these factors that kind of play with your head. But I'm prepared now for me to ask myself, like, why are you doing this? And the answer, you got to have answers to these questions. So you'll find, if you do it a few times, you're going to find that you're going to ask yourself the same question all the time. Like, is it worth it? Should you be here? Why are you doing this? all those questions, and you just need to have answers for those questions. So when I ask myself, why am I doing this? I'm doing it to test myself. I'm doing it because I love winning, and you can't win if you don't sign up, right?
Sure.
So, and the second thing that I do is whenever I go to an IBJJF event, if I make the podium, which is first, second, or third place, then you're eligible to compete in the open weight division. The open weight division means there's no weight limit. It's the same age, same experience level, but no weight divisions.
Okay.
And so I always sign up for that.
Man,
and so
nuts.
after my division gets over, whether I win or lose, the second thing that I'm prepared for is for my brain to tell myself, don't do the open division. You just need to relax. You put in the work, now go home. But I have to fight through that. I'm like, nope, I'm going to do the open division. And I do it. And I have good success in the open division also.
Wow. So do you ever compete mostly with your own age, or is it 30, 35, 40 years old? I mean. Yeah,
I used to in the beginning before I knew any better. Right. I used to do what you're doing. And sometimes you don't have a choice. If you want to compete, that's all you got. But I decided to focus on the bigger tournaments that provide a more even playing field by having competitors that are my age, or I sometimes I won't get a competitor in my age bracket, so I'll go down in age, but I've made it a rule in my own life. I don't go down more than 10 years.
Okay.
So like last year, I did the Long Beach Open in November. There wasn't anybody in my weight bracket, so I went down to the 45 to 50 age bracket, and I also had to go up one weight division to get a match, and I won the division. So I only go 10 years because look, there's a big difference between a 45-year-old and a 55-year-old. There's a bigger difference between a 35-year-old and a 55-year-old. So you got to be smart. You got to realize, look, you're getting up there, and you don't want this. It's hard enough and you don't want the cards stacked against you. You don't want the deck stacked against you. So
sure.
I've made it a rule that I don't go down. But if you're looking to get people your age, I would recommend going to an IBJJF competition. I just saw that they're having one in Kansas City. I don't know how far that is from you, but you may have to fly to get there. But it's definitely going to be a much better experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I need to consider. I just get, it is a big difference. 20, 25 years is a big difference. Let me ask you this.
Huge.
At your age, how do you stay, I guess, healthy and competitive and competing in jiu-jitsu now? And that's like with me. Let me tell you my whole regimen. I work out maybe 4 or 5 days a week with weights and stretching and yoga and keeping my joints strong and everything else. And then, of course, I do jiu-jitsu because I feel like that really helps prevent any type of injuries. But how do you, I guess, stay healthy and competitive and competing in jiu-jitsu?
Well, the number one factor for me is going to be the way that I approach sparring. And so for those that may not know, at the end of every class, usually we spar. At my school, we usually spar 5 6-minute rounds. So we spar 30 minutes straight. And this is where you go with, full resistance.
Right.
And so we have, unlike a competition, I have guys that the Marine Corps base, Camp Pendleton, is not too far from us. And so a lot of Marines live in Temecula, for example. And these guys are usually very tough, very strong, very young, and they don't like to quit. And so these guys are my training partners, some of these guys. Also have law enforcement and, different ages. I have 18-year-old kids that are super strong. So you have to be smart in the way you approach sparring. So in jiu-jitsu, you develop what we refer to as a game. It's kind of like your approach. If you could have everything in an ideal situation, what position would you be in? Would you be on the top or would you be on the bottom? And what submissions would you be looking for? That's what we refer to as your game. So over the years, I've developed a game that's very gentle on my body. And for those that may be familiar with jiu-jitsu a little bit or familiar with UFC, it's called a guard game. So I intentionally take the bottom position. I intentionally come in legs first, feet first, instead of head first. I pull my opponent on top of me, and I'm very good at taking him and putting him on the bottom position and taking the top position from there. That's usually the initial scramble is usually where people are going to get injured, is when you're trying to take the match to the ground. If you're coming in head first as opposed to feet first, it makes a huge difference.
Okay. When I do competitions, it's like myself, I try to go ahead and take them down either with a collar drag or ankle pick or something. And because if I get on the top, I feel like I'm better. And I was able to win a gold, which was great. But see, that was the first time I started on the top. It would be nice. I need to probably consider about, pulling guard and getting, and working my way on the top from bottom to top. But,
yeah, imagine if you had the confidence of knowing that you could just voluntarily take the bottom position, and within 1 to 2 minutes you could be on the top.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a great thing?
Oh yeah, it's changed my game, I think.
Posted a video of me doing that exact same thing,
half guard.
A highlight reel. Yeah, the half guard.
Yeah.
So that's really how I stay healthy right there. If you watch that video, you'll see there's not a whole lot of things that can go wrong on my end.
Well, listen, it's not that I stalk you, but I do watch your post almost maybe 2 or 3 times every time that you actually put something on regarding, the workouts and everything else. So, Gene, I want to ask one more question, then I want to go in and talk about bullying in the public schools again and your thoughts about that. I've been training in a jiu-jitsu in a competition type of academy. And just 3-4 weeks ago, I switched to a Gracie Academy. And it seems like I like the pace better, but it was a little shot because it was just a fast pace at this competition. I mean, we talk about, we go through a few techniques and then it's hard rolling. What's your thoughts about a competition academy versus a Gracie? Because it is a Gracie Academy that you go to, right?
No, when you say Gracie Academy, usually that means Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is actually like a registered trademark. So Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is one side of the family. Carlson Gracie is actually on the other side of the family. So yes, I belong to a Carlson. I'm an affiliate of Carlson Gracie, which is like the number one, one of the number one. Well, the number one. Back in the early days, they were the first. Carlson Senior was the first one to break off and start teaching outside the family, or to the average guy instead of people that had money.
Okay.
So yeah, so it is a little bit different. So Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, they do emphasize self-defense.
Okay.
So if you're going to a Gracie Academy, it would be under the direction, I'm sure, of Henner and Hiron, who reside in Torrance, California.
Okay, because I'm actually with Pedro Sauer.
Yeah, so he's on the side of the family also. So Pedro Sauer is under Hickson, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, but him and Hickson are good friends, no matter even if I'm wrong on that fact. But Pedro Sauer would be more. As far as I know, he would kind of be more of a hybrid between some competition. It depends on each geographical location. You might find something completely different in a different city. So speak on behalf of what they would be teaching there. But there is usually the Alio side of the family, which is Horion, Hickson, Henner, and Hiron. It emphasizes self-defense jiu-jitsu as opposed to competition jiu-jitsu, which would be the Carlos Jr. side, or Carlos Sr. and Carlos Jr. Okay,
let me ask you this in regards to promotions. Do the kids sort of log in before they come to class, and so you at least have an idea, their attendance and the hours on the mat and everything else, and then do you have like a syllabus of certain techniques that they have to get from white belt to blue belt, or from white belt to first stripe, second stripe, and all that? Are you structured that way?
Well, for the kids we are, yeah. For the adults, no. The kids, we have a curriculum, and it's a 6-month curriculum, and we go over it. As soon as we finish it, we go over it again. And then if they want to get the next belt, which is the gray belt for kids, they have to take a gray belt test, which they have to demonstrate that they know the techniques and they're proficient at the techniques.
Okay, so how do you do with the adults? Don't you have a syllabus in regards to, or do you just pick a technique or? Well,
with the adults, we have there's a certain way that I teach the adults. It's not a formal curriculum, but what it is, we break the jiu-jitsu down into 8 basic positions.
Okay.
Starting with closed guard and ending with back control. And then we spend 2 to 3 months on each position. So we'll spend a good 3 months on closed guard, how to sweep, how to submit, how to pass.
Okay.
And then when we're done with that, we move on to half guard, how to sweep, how to submit, how to pass. And then when we're done with that, we move to side control. Same thing. So that we go through this hierarchy of positions so that by the time you go through all the positions one time, you're familiar with all the positions and you should have options at each position.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of structure, I think. At least you're not going to go have, teach on this technique.
It's more than most. I'll tell you this. In my experience, it's more than what most schools have.
Right.
Especially if they're competition based. A lot of times you go to a competition based school, you get a random technique every day. There's something completely different being taught.
Yeah.
So there's no really cohesion to it.
Right.
But the way we teach, it really within 6 months, guys get really good.
Right. Well, listen, I want to go ahead and talk about bullying in the public schools, and just not in the schools, but in the community, in regards to politics as well. I saw a video on your social media on your kids program, and Gene, your kids program is absolutely huge. There are tons of kids there, and of course, I want to ask you a lot about that, but I want to go into this. What, in your opinion, and this is your opinion, what is the best cure to stop bullying in the public schools? Is it for kids to start taking jiu-jitsu? Is it for parents to start raising their kids, to getting more involved with their kids? What is in your opinion, what is the cure of bullying?
Well, the interesting thing about me is that I was actually bullied when I was a kid, and I was bullied pretty bad from the time I was in the 7th grade all the way through high school. I actually had to change schools several times. And, part of it might have been my fault. I've always been a standout. I've always, done things for attention. And the reality is that some kids just don't like that. So, and not only that, but I was a white surfer kid living in a Latino community, like predominantly Latino community. All my friends were Mexican. And all my enemies were Mexican also, just by default where I lived. I lived in Chula Vista. It was the second border town north of Tijuana. And so, I come from a background of being bullied, and it really bothers me to no end, because unless you've been bullied, it's kind of like the feeling of being thrown into a swimming pool and not knowing how to swim. You feel like you're going to die, like you have no escape. There's nothing you can do to get away, and pain and getting injured is inevitable. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard, especially for kids, to try to deal with it. So we're always going to have bullying. Bullying is just a fact. I believe it's inherent in our sinful nature as from a Christian worldview, and so it's not going anywhere. But we can be better. We can be better prepared to deal with it. I think 2 things need to happen. Kids need to learn how to defend themselves, and kids need to look out for other kids. Kids that do know how to defend themselves need to stand up and look out for other kids. And so there was a couple times in my life where I was being bullied, and I remember 2 occasions where another kid stepped in and stopped it and really came to the rescue. And so that's important. There's most schools in California, I don't know how it is where you live, but most schools in California, they have this no fault kind of policy where if you defend yourself, you're going to get suspended as well, because they don't want to make a decision on who started it. Well, I don't agree with that at all.
Sure.
So if a kid, I always say this, if a kid comes and trains with me for 6 months, and he trains 3 times a week with me for 6 months, 6 months down the road, a bigger kid can come through that door who outweighs him by 10 to 20 pounds, and I can put them together and I can say, okay, try to hold him down with 100% resistance. The smaller kid will prevail. He'll not only not be able to be held down, but he'll be able to hold the bigger kid down, and he'll be able to submit him at will. He'll be able to choke him or break his arm if he had to. And so what this does is this instills confidence in the kid so that he's not going to put up with bullying. And also takes away that fear of, that fear for my life.
Right.
If I know that I can take down a bigger, stronger opponent because I do it 3 times a week in practice, some kid shoving me or telling me he's going to kick my butt is not going to be the end of the world.
Sure.
I can stand up to that kid, and if he continues to threaten my well-being, I can do what's necessary to put him in his place. Mm-hmm. And I haven't met any parents that won't support their kid, putting a bully in place,
right?
Even if it means getting their own kids suspended. So I think that parents need to be responsible and at the very least have their kids in some form of martial arts. I think the most effective and the general consensus is, if you ask the experts, jiu-jitsu is the most effective form of martial arts, self-defense.
Mm-hmm. You know, and I agree with you there. I think, you know, just because the history of jiu-jitsu, because it was developed for smaller people to defend themselves against larger people, you know, with leveraging. In regards to California versus the East Coast, West Virginia, where I'm at, West Virginia is the number one in the country that has the most bullying. California is like, I don't know, they're like 45 or something. I mean, they have a problem with bullying. Of course, like you said, there's problems with bullying in all the public schools, but statistically, less in California. You know, and I know I mentioned this several times throughout the podcast, but they say that 85% of all bullying that takes place, there's no intervention. And I agree with you to an extent, is that when I first saw the statistic where 85% of all bullying, there's no intervention, I was thinking, okay, well, obviously the teachers are not intervening, or, you know, or the parents aren't, you know, getting involved, or the administration. Well, what we're finding out is that the kids are not letting the teachers know, aren't letting the parents know. And then what is on top of that is that it's you know, when we witness something that's tragic or that's, you know, shocking, you know, we're thinking, okay, what do we do? And then, you know, like 5 minutes later, after it's all said and done, we're thinking, man, we should have done this or that. And I think kids, they want to intervene. If they see somebody getting bullied, they want to go ahead and, you know, go up to that person and stop. But they're thinking, okay, well, if I go ahead and intervene, is it going to make things worse for me? Am I going to start getting bullied? And it's just a big cycle. So I think that with like you were saying, is that with getting involved in martial arts, I think that is a big thing, because if anything else, it builds confidence. What's happening is that I just saw a video where you know, a student got beat up in a bathroom, you know, by 4 or 5 other kids, and there's only so much that you can do, and it's just heartbreaking that happens. But I think honestly, if you know, when you're walking down the hallway, I think people don't you agree that kids can pick up where that person has low self-esteem, where their head's down? Don't you think confidence is a big issue or a big factor, you know, to prevent against bullying? Is that correct, do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they usually go for a weaker victim,
right?
And they're not anticipating that the kid is going to stand up to them,
right? You know, Gene, in regards to the times that you've been bullied, so you were bullied in middle school, throughout high school. Was it were you bullied by just 2 or 3 the same people, or was it just a mixture of everyone that was bullying you? And I know that you mentioned that you probably, you know, put it on yourself, but was there just a few selected people that were bullying you, or was it sort of everybody?
It was a few selected people. I remember 7th grade, I walked into my very first dance, you know, school dance, mm-hmm. and somebody kicked me in the butt with like pointed shoes as hard as they could. That was the first instance. I didn't even know who I turned around, it was 3 cholos, 3 lowrider guys. Didn't know who they were, couldn't tell you who they were, don't even remember what they looked like. Then after 4th period, I remember there was this kid, he would punch me in the chest every time I walked by him. I didn't even think he spoke English. I didn't even know who this kid was or what he wanted with me. So, but there was one kid, my wife is actually good friends with his sister. So we saw him not too long ago. But he made it a habit, like, to make my life miserable from 9th grade all the way through high school. So I would see him out in public, like down at the Little League baseball field, and he'd walk up to me and he would headbutt me in the mouth, and my mouth would start bleeding, and then he would push me and wanted to fight. And so it was just he probably confronted me 4 or 5 times. But that's the one that stands out the most. And then my wife told his sister, "Hey, your brother used to bully my husband," and he's like, "Yeah, he feels bad about that now." And I thought to myself, man, it's a good thing I'm a Christian, because there's a part of me that feels like inviting him up to the dojo and say, "Hey, come up here and let me give you a free jiu-jitsu lesson."
Yeah, or for a free week, and then you just turn everybody else on him. You know, that is so sad. I'm not for sure if you're familiar with a comedian called, his name was Sinbad, and he's just,
Yes, I know.
Okay, and it was funny because he was bullied also. He was bullied. He was telling me stories, and then he said that there was one time when the kids, because he played music and he played the drums, and they stole his sticks and they were beating him all the way home, and he was running, and his dad saw him outside the window, and he said, what's going on here? And he goes, "Well, these kids are bullying me." Did you ever tell your parents that you were getting bullied?
Yeah, my parents actually put me in Taekwondo because of this when I was 15 years old. Interesting story. So, 6 months of Taekwondo, I get my orange belt, which is the first promotion back then. This is back in the 80s. And and then there's a confrontation at school with some kid, and I go to throw a kick at him, and I slip on the grass. He jumps on top of me and gets me in the mount position. I have no idea how to get out of the mount position, because guess what? You don't teach that in Taekwondo.
Sure.
So I was like, man, this doesn't work. Like, how am I going to kick this fool when I'm laying on the ground?
Right.
And so it got broke up by some teachers. I got suspended. But yeah, my parents, they put me in a private school at one point, and then I wanted to go back to public school, so they put me back in the public school, and then I still had problems. So they knew, my mom was supportive. She felt bad for me. But, there's nothing she could do about it.
Right. So let me ask you this. I mean, being bullied, Gene, from, middle school to high school, I mean, that can traumatize a kid. How have you been able to live with that for all these years? I mean, and what I'm saying is this: I was bullied, and I still remember. And it seems like I'm using it more of a tool to help other kids that have been bullied. But how are you dealing with being bullied? I mean, are you helping other kids that have been being bullied, telling your story, or do you just sort of push it under the carpet and just, forget about it?
No. It's definitely a motivating factor for me. It's a motivating factor. First of all, I think it's a motivating factor in me training martial arts, and wanting to get good, wanting to get my black belt. It's a motivating factor for me to teach kids. But guess what? Sometimes bullies grow up to be adults. There's a lot of adults out there that are bullies. It is expressed in road rage.
Right.
It's expressed in different ways. I've been in situations where the guy at Starbucks is bullying the barista, and he's just berating her and I'm look at him and I say, man, like, you're a bully. Like, why are you bullying this girl? She didn't do anything to you. She's just trying to do her job.
Is that what you said? I mean, this has happened?
Yes, I'll definitely stand. Yeah, there's been several times that I've stood up for people and told them they should be ashamed of themselves. Like, so far I haven't had any problems, because I think people realize like your calmness and your demeanor, and I mean, maybe the fact that I have a mohawk and I'm 55 years old, they think that maybe there's something a little off.
That would make me think twice.
But and the fact that I'm willing to stand up and help. But I've seen it with adults too. Like, I hate to say it, but my own brother, who's like 4 years younger than me, he when he had a drinking problem, he's sober now, but when he had a drinking problem, he would bully people. He would bully my other family members. He would bully my son sometimes. And there was one time when I had to stand up and put him in his place and tell him, look, you're not going to do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And he's like, 6'3" construction worker, way bigger than me. And just my tone and the way that I addressed it, like, he knew, okay, I have to stop
right.
or something bad is going to happen.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, bullies grow up to be adults. And so I feel like I'm not just helping people with their self-confidence and in the event that they have to stand up to somebody who's threatening them. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I'm also educating and training people to stand up for the good of others, for the weaker people,
Sure.
Which is important. We need more of that.
Just a couple more questions, and we'll just go ahead and wrap it up. I saw a post on your social media where you were talking about how many times kids should train jiu-jitsu, and I think you said something like 2 times a week, but maybe you mentioned maybe you recommend 3. Tell us exactly, you can shorten up this, tell us why kids need to be training more than just once a week or even twice a week.
Well, because jiu-jitsu is so complex. So imagine this. This is a good analogy, I think. I compare jiu-jitsu to learning a new language. So you learn the alphabet. Imagine trying to learn a language, right? So you learn the alphabet, then the next step is to formulate words, and then you put sentences together, and then pretty soon you're able to speak whole paragraphs. That's how jiu-jitsu is. You learn individual details, and then you learn to put these details together. Then you learn to use these techniques and these positions under stress in real time when you have to think quickly. And it all comes together over time. But imagine if you're coming to Spanish class once a week and your friend is coming 3 times a week, right? He's going to progress 3 times as quickly as you. In the Spanish analogy, okay, so he's going to learn the language 3 times faster than you. In the jiu-jitsu analogy, he is going to learn jiu-jitsu 3 times faster than you, which means at the end of every class, when it's time to add resistance, when it's time to spar and to actually hone your skill with timing and resistance, you're at a severe disadvantage because you've only been coming once a week. This guy's been coming 3 times a week. And the way we structure our class is we will teach one technique in the kids' class for the whole week. Sometimes we'll teach it 2 weeks in a row. And so we start teaching the details on Monday and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, we're adding resistance. By the time Saturday comes around, you should know that technique. You should know how to perform it. You should be able to do it if the scenario presents itself with resistance. And so kids that are only coming once a week are at a severe disadvantage, and they get discouraged because their teammates are dominating them, and maybe they started after them, and now all of a sudden they're better than them. They can't figure out why. Jiu-jitsu can't be treated just like a hobby. If you want to get good at, if you want it to be a hobby, fine, treat it like a hobby. If you want to get good at it, and you want it to work for you, you have to be serious. You got to train minimum of twice a week, preferably 3 times a week.
Right. And what happens is that kids will get frustrated because they're not getting as good, versus the kids that are going 3, 4, 5 times a week, and then they end up quitting.
Yes.
And it's just like adults. They'll come in and they'll go ahead and be there for 3, 4 months, and they're thinking, "Gosh, man, I'm not getting anywhere." But what they don't understand is that the people that were there are also getting better, as time goes by, and then they end up quitting too.
Yeah.
But Gene, I want to end up on this. The last social media post that I saw that really impacted me was when you were discussing defeating the internal quitter voice. Can you elaborate on that? I think that everybody should at least hear this, and I'll tell you the reason why. I was doing a school assembly with kids, and one of the topics that I share is the importance of making right choices. And I said, you know what, the easiest choice for anybody to make when things aren't going their way, either at home or in sports or in jiu-jitsu or in music, is to quit. Anybody can quit. And I said the hardest choice that we have to make is not to quit. It's always getting back up and trying harder. I can't tell you how many times I have done a crappy concert, and it's hard for me to, of course I have to keep on, because it's my occupation. I have to keep on playing. Mm-hmm. But can you go elaborate on that whole discussion that you did on social media about defeating the internal quitter voice?
Yeah. So I've already mentioned a couple times that I'm a Christian, so this kind of makes sense even more, I think, from a Christian worldview, because we weren't created, our first parents were not created for adversity, for work. They were created just to to be able to dwell in a comfortable situation with their creator. And we forfeited that through sin. And so since that time, we've been faced with diversity. We've been faced with trouble. We've been faced with sickness and death and, people trying to hurt us. It's just a fact of life. And what happens is because the way that our brains have been wired, the way that our minds have been wired, is that when we face severe discomfort, right away our brain tells us to stop, tells us to get in. You got to get back to the comfort zone. It's a preservation mechanism, is what it is. It's a preservation mechanism that tries to put our body in a situation that's going to cause the least amount of harm. And so, for example, if you wake up one day and you say, "Oh, I'm going to go run 2 miles," but you don't run. You don't run. You haven't been jogging. You start jogging halfway through the first mile. Your brain is probably going to tell you to stop, and it's going to give you some type of excuse to stop. And so this is common. This is common in all aspects of life. Work gets too hard, so we got to find another job. Or marriage gets too hard, so I want a divorce. I'm not happy. Sports gets too hard, so the kid tells his parents, "I don't want to play anymore." So this is a voice, especially this is true in jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu is one of the most physical disciplines that you can practice. It requires a tremendous amount of endurance, a tremendous amount of focus, and physical ability, and there's going to be times when your brain is telling you to stop. So what happens is your heart rate gets to a certain point, and you're trying to take in enough air to continue to feed that blood, and your brain says, "Hey, David, you need to stop right now. Quit." So what happens, though, most people don't realize this, is that usually happens at about 40% capacity. So I might have 100% capacity, but at 40%, my brain starts telling me, "Hey, stop. What are you doing yourself? It's not worth it." And your brain will give you a myriad of excuses why you shouldn't do this. If you understand this beforehand and you power through and you tell your brain, "No, I'm not stopping," and you keep on going, you will be amazed at how far you can go physically if you override your voice, that inner voice that's telling you to quit. And so this is something that I've just learned recently that I've been applying. And this happens especially in competition, because in competition, your adrenaline is pumping, your heart rate is escalated, and you're sucking wind. You want oxygen. You got a guy on top of you that's trying to strangle you or break your arm, a grown man. And your brain says, "Hey, why are you doing this? Go back to the hotel. Go sit in the jacuzzi." And you got to talk. You got to talk. If you want to go beyond that, that's fine. You want to go sit in the jacuzzi, go sit in the jacuzzi. But I want to go further, and you will be amazed at if you push yourself and you shut that voice off. First, you have to anticipate it, because if you don't anticipate it, it comes along and you just listen to it. But if you know it's coming, when it comes, you say, "Oh, there it is. We must be at 40%. I still got 60% in the tank. You can keep going." So that's what I'm talking about. That's an internal quitter voice. You got to learn to turn it off.
Well, that's about all we have for the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. Before we go, I want to thank again BJJ Moses, Gene, for coming on the show. Thanks, Gene. I also want to go ahead and thanks to sponsors and for supporting the Bully Resistance Show. Also, if I want to go ahead and mention this, I want to encourage you, if you haven't subscribed to the Bully Resistance Show, you can actually go to my website at www.davebond.org, and you can subscribe to the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. So until next time, thanks for listening.